C'est un grand plaisir de recevoir Jean-Baptiste Labrune. Jean-Baptiste Labrune vient du MIT, il travaille au Medialab et aussi dans les laboratoires belges, Labsud. Et donc il va nous faire une présentation, il n'a pas voulu nous dire sur quoi ça portait exactement, mais généralement c'est entre le Fablab, la Carspace et les nouvelles façons d'interagir. Donc on va voir, donc on va découvrir sa présentation. Je te laisse te connecter sur l'ordi.
Ok, et j'ai combien de temps, Nicolas? Non, c'est soit une demi-heure, 15 minutes avec les questions. Ok. Okay, thank you, Nicolas, for your invitation, and thank you all for great presentations throughout the 2 days I was here. So I will do my presentation in English because it's recorded, but I just placed some little words in French because we're also in Toulouse. So I think I will have to do that a lot. I know it's that. You don't want this to So basically what is written here is playing with rules and jouer avec les règles et pas jouer, not jouer avec des règles. So the idea, and it will be the only point I will make today, is that in French we have one word to say jouer, play, and in the English language you have two, they have two. They have the game, concept of the notion of the game, and the concept of playing. And I believe, and this is what I will try to explain to you, that in lots of creative places I've been, and I think Fab Labs are a great example of that, not only there are lots of rules and there are games, but most of the phenomena I observed there were playing. And I will try to explain the difference to you guys today and why it's important. And maybe to give you 2 or 3 challenges that we might think of together as a takeaway. So very briefly, you don't see it very much, but it's not important. So I'm Jean-Baptiste, I'm JB in the English language. I have many hats, and I like also to build hats and to offer hats to people. Basically, you see some picture of me here. One is in Mediamatic in Amsterdam, which is kind of more creative art and technology and society place. Here it's a workshop I was doing for DIY toys hacking workshop. This one is in the two on the right. It's a biology, synthetic biology lab at MIT. So I was documenting how a engineer was trying to ask a biologist to be part of an art and science project at MIT. So just to show you that I have the chance, very nice thing in my job is that I can be in very diverse environments and meet very nice people like you guys, and usually just talk with them. Basically, it's some kind of a panorama of who am I, and I'm French as well. So basically, I'm a researcher. I have a PhD in computer science and in psychology. So I like human sciences, but also the technological part. I'm interested in phenomena that manifest a situation or an object that is both new and appropriate. And the nuance is that you can make new with a machine. A machine can take something and make a million of new, slightly different things, but then it might not be easy to know what is appropriate. And I'm interested in this kind of situation. And I call them in my PhD exaptive phenomena, in reference to this guy here in The Simpsons. His name is Stephen Jay Gould. He's a psychologist, evolutionary psychologist, and basically he studied how throughout the course of history some evolution took place. And when we think of Darwinian evolution, we don't know how evolution basically evolved or spread over time. And he has a theory, it's called punctuated equilibrium, that shows that for a very long time, sometimes nothing happened. You think there is no evolution. No, evolution is kind of a break. And then sometimes there is a high peak of activity of evolution. And he showed that, and what he described is that things don't just adapt from nothing. Things do not just emerge in nature or actually in human culture out of nothing. And he showed that very likely something that is new comes from something old, and he described how something old brings something new. Is it a new function? Is it, do you change something that you had? Like yesterday we saw these cups that were traveling across the world, teletransportating themselves. And there was a model, a template, but then there was a variation. So they had a form, they had also a function. What I saw is that the form changed a little bit, but then the function changed because the function was to drink coffee, but then it was to drink champagne. So not only the form was different, but the function was different. And if you think of this in terms of design for industrial design, it's very interesting, but also in nature. An example I put here is, and I will go back to this very quickly so you understand, but it's a complex word, exaptation, but it's basically, he said that there are things that he observed that were not adaptations, they were pre-adaptation. You adapt something in order to go further on to something else. And he showed, for example, that the wings of animals, they didn't evolve for flight. And one example is that you have lots of animals with wings, they don't fly. So the primary adaptation of wings is thermic regulation. Animals have wings to maintain their body temperature. And it's counterintuitive because we think that, yeah, wings is to fly. But no, originally it was not for that. So I'm very interested in something that has been made for something that turns into something else that was not at all the primary idea. I wanted to make a cup for coffee. At the end, we ended up putting champagne in it. Okay, I like this concept. So this is an exaptation, okay? So this is my thesis. I studied this in the context of child-machine interaction, and I showed that how in details there are different kind of co-adaptation, co-option that constitute exaptation. It's a bit technical, but one of the deliverables is that in order to have reconfiguration that can happen, you need to have open spaces. And Gould called them spandrels, like this kind of byproduct space in cathedrals that when you build an arch, you have what is called, what is close to the arch. You have a byproduct of the arch, which is this space that is close to the arch. And I will show you some example that became a form of art in the Middle Age. So, exaptation, I showed you, flying is an exaptation. It's a secondary adaptation of something that is an adaptation for thermic regulation, okay? So, again, birds do not have wings to fly, they first have them for thermic regulation, like the ears of elephants that maintain the temperature of their brain. If the ears of elephant would be bigger, they might fly. But unfortunately, they do not. Maybe in Disney cartoons, but not in reality, okay? So the example, this is in my PhD, so I was studying some workshops we had in Swedish Institute with edible sensors for children, like basically the workshop was to introduce children to pure data, but the places where I was studying them, it was constituted of walls made out of salt, and the children, they started to lick the walls because it's salt, and then started to lick the sensors. So yeah, you might argue that sensors are not made to be licked, they are not edible, but why not? So this is this kind of thing that struck me, is like how a wall with salt interacts with a sensor and pure data and children. So what are the links? How does this happen? And how could we think of technology that might be, for example, edible? Because for a child it makes sense. For us maybe it does not make sense. Another thing is how children create their own game. They had a ball, but then they had a stick and they create golf ball, okay? It's like, how do you combine, recombine, adapt, create new forms, new functions based on the material you have? And there is one story of the email. I don't know if you know it, the invention of the email. One of the stories is that, because many people claim they invented, they coined the email, the concept or the name, but so basically it's that the email is an exaptation of a protocol that is called FTP. You know FTP, File Transfer Protocol? So basically they invented FTP, you can send a file, and very soon it appeared that people would send each other files with 0 kilobytes. Nothing inside, but the title of the file would be, hello, how are you? Oh, great, and you? And what do you do for lunch? Oh, I can come with you. And after a while they say, okay, you don't need the 0 kilobyte file, let's call it mail. There is a RFC, and then it became the email. So it's because there was this little label, which is the title of the file, that people invested it, placed their intelligence to communicate. We are very good into placing ourselves in places we are not supposed to be, and to place communication in it. And this is another example of exaptation. So this is the definition, it's a bit technical, so I will not go in this, but it's in the slide. And I will go more to the concept of spandrels. So in French, the word is also very complex, un écoinçon. Okay, we don't use this word very often, but basically in this paper, the spandrels of San Marco, it's a critique of the adaptionist that everything should be better and we should go stronger, augmented. The idea of Gould is that when you create an arch, you create this space around it, okay? You create a byproduct, and that you should consider the byproduct, the space around things, as important as the thing itself. So not only is important what you create, but all the rest, not just the prosthetic leg you made in the Fablab, but all the molds, all the people involved in it, everything around is as important as the leg that you will show in the presentation. And we need to go to have tools to document this context. In the Middle Age, these spandrels became a form of art. They started to be decorated, and in nature it's the same. Something that was not intended to have a function, as a morphological byproduct, became very important. So, for example, you might argue that in lots of species, it's only decorative. The decorative part is for defending yourself to scare your enemy. But what if your enemy does not have eyes? So it has no meaning. But it was shown, for example, that by Gould that some fishes have decoration in places under the sea where there is no light. So all these kind of patterns are useless if you cannot have photons to illuminate them. And for very thousands of years, as a morphological byproduct, there was pattern because it was the way the fish was constructed. And then at one point there was some kind of a change in the water, and the fish changed milieu, and then there was light. And only survived those that kept this feature, this trait. The thing you can ask is why keeping a trait for so many long years? And again, it's because it's a morphological byproduct. It's one kind of exaptation. It's because I am cutting plywood that I would have plywood waste, but that might become this plywood waste the origin of the next project I'm going. Because somebody's like, oh, this is so beautiful. No, it's this I made. No, I don't care. I like the waste. Oh, come on. And this kind of practice, I think, is interesting to document and to celebrate. So I call them, it's easier than spenders, like open spaces, how you create them and how you protect them. And to go more into the theories, basically not only to study how things become like this ball with its DNA, but how actually the context evolves, and actually the context is also a programmed environment that might evolve. So lots of study in the 50s when they discovered DNA concentrated on the evolution of the thing, not of the context. And I believe that we are now more back in the study of how the context is also architectured, and that in a way the ball is as much influenced by the terrain on the way it evolved than by what is inside it. So again, the context is important. So another thing, I'm a researcher, but very often, like today by Nicolas, I'm a guest, I'm an invitee. So I inhabit terrains where there are a lot of exaptation, and what I do usually, I co-create objects, environments, and methods to document these terrains with the people that live in them. So for example here, it's in the Media Lab, you don't see it very much, but this is Eric Rosenbaum. He's a great guy, very funny, and very creative and playful person that is showing some kind of a toy he was making to an ethnographer. It's Lucy Suchman. She's a great ethnographer, and her students. So what I did in the Media Lab, I created environments to capture what was going on in these spaces. This space is called the Cube. It's destroyed now because the Media Lab changed building, but the first building of the Media Lab used to be made on cubic structures where a researcher would have the same kind of space, and it's a gigantic cube with lots of greenhouses and toys and architecture, lots of things in the same place. And what my contribution was to equip these places with reflexive technology that could capture, document what was going on, but not automatically. Things that would assist people to document what they were doing. Okay? But in order to be a guest, I need kind people to give me hospitality. So this is an exchange. So it's also something I wanted to notice. And so these are part of some of the research I did with the children. It's more theoretical. This is a picture from a radical activist video documentary group from the 70s in the US that gave video cameras to children in school so they can film themselves. So my point is that documentation shouldn't be something automatic or something that is authoritative, that somebody is shooting you, but I believe we should have tools so we can document ourselves, and we should be able to build the tools to document ourselves, to be highly reflexive on the documentation. And in this example here, you have children in the forest, and they are taking notes, and they are taking notes on the back of another child. I like this idea of piggybacking on other, as you were describing, Thomas, how for programming you could teach a child that can teach a child. So I believe in the same way you can document and have this kind of chains of documentation, but with no central leader, even though in this one there is the one filming and the other, but we, as the spectator, we can take distance from that. And so I worked during my PhD, and after I worked on cameras for children and sensors for children to document that they would build, so they construct them, they know how they work, and they can deploy them. But then I work also in creative environment. This is Idea Garden. It's one of the space of the Media Lab as well. It's a fully kind of equipped environment with lots of different tools. And I was discussing at dinner yesterday with some people. One of the tools, you don't see it, it's in this box. It's basically a globe camera. It's a webcam, high resolution, with a physical button on it that is physically attached to the space with electricity and linked with the system. So it's not wireless, it's wireline. Why? Because it's always on. It's an object that is always at hand, à portée de la main. So you can document as fast as you need the thing that is working now, that might die in 1 minute because this robot is working just today. And I believe we have to be swift, fast, but also efficient in discriminating the appropriate content, because we don't want to produce 1 million pictures of everything that is made in the Fab Lab. We want to only communicate the ones that are appropriate for me, for us, for the people I want to give this picture to, so we can make sense out of it. And I worked a lot in the Media Lab to equip some spaces with these kind of things, and then there was some more kind of augmented environment things. So you could sketch and take picture of things that you've sketched, and then Sean, a student, I worked with him on a machine that is a derivation of the Metiers, a machine that is made by the MTN people, like by David Carr. So basically the idea would be that you sketch something and then you grab something from the environment, let's say a leaf of a tree, you put it in the machine, there is a webcam, it's an augmented environment, so it shoots it and reprojects it, it can measure objects, and then it can mill what you just put, so you don't need a 3D compy or cat.py object system, you just need like a photocopier, you put something, you press and you have a copy. But here, because we had like motion, like hand tracking, you can also move, you could put a Lego piece and do arrangement. And Sean is doing this PhD on how children can recompose their toys by themselves without a universal constructor kit. The idea is you just put toys and maybe a branch and maybe this exact piece of bamboo that I just put from the forest and I can connect it. So I was very interested in how environment helps us to think. Environment to think with, not just object to think with, okay? And the last thing, like I have 3 hats today, a researcher, an invitee, and also a documenter. I love to understand the nature of the relationships between physical objects, like a stone, artifacts, things that have been done, like a little, I don't know, little shield or little drum, or plants, animals, and people, like this network of relationships. And what strikes me is that very often I am in innovation places and we talk about processes, and there is a life cycle, and we have this kind of diagram and stuff. And when I talk with people from human science, say, no, this is not just a process. There are collections of objects and maybe idea, belief, and thought. So it's not just a process, it's a culture. But what was the most interesting to me is that I think that we could see this kind of environment broader than process and culture. And what I would like to argue with you now is that I think that these environments are playful, ludic environment, like ludic in French, okay? And this for me is very interesting. It's an 8-bit musician from New York City. And he hacked this kind of, machine to do electroshock. You know, you use those here in Toulouse? No? Electroshock? No? And he hacked them to make music on hacked kind of toys. And I was like, why did he do that? You know, what was really at stake there? And what from his own psychological and mental condition is in this musical performance? How did he think about that? And I think that there is something beyond a process. I'm not sure he followed guidelines to do that. And in terms of culture, I don't think it's very appropriate, or it's. I think there is something beyond. I had this intuition, and I tried to check it in different environments. And the inspiration for that is this. How many of you know this term, Reggio Emilia here? 1%? The region, okay, nice. And it's also, so great, already somebody knows it's in Italy. It's a project basically where they try to redesign the the way we could have kindergarten in the school for children. It was after the Second World War, in a very idealistic context for Europe, where you had a lot of communal and, you know, kibbutz and phalanstère, like kind of rethinking of how we could live together, and for example, how kindergarten could be led by the children, not by adults. And in this environment, the only pedagogical rule was, kind of like in a game, that the children should find a project they want to do throughout the year, and then they should document what they do in the year to offer it to the next year. So let's say that, for example, the children would like to build a boat. They would say, okay, we like to build a boat, but we want to be able to go, all of us in the boat, and go on the river and use this boat. So imagine you have children 4 to 5 years old that will pass their year to build the boat. So they will have to draw the boat, draw boats, to think about what is the resistance of material, what are kind of needs could be, skills could be used to build it. So they will have to ask their parents, and people will try to help them. And in many ways, it reminds me a bit of what old children do in Fablabs. With, oh, I have a project, how people can help me, and how can I harness skills and stuff. And I think that it's a great inspiration to see how this kindergarten evolved, and how lots of the findings of the pedagogists there was that in order to advance, you had to think of how you share with people, how you offer your knowledge as a gift, and also how you document. And I will go back on this point because for me, and it's one of my challenges, I think documentation is key, and how can we go to that. So now very quickly, because we don't have that much time, but what I will try to do, I will try to insert more pictures in my presentation after this presentation, so the actual slides will be bigger than the reality, if I'm allowed by Nicola. I think it's possible. So these are some of the terrains I've been in, or I studied as a theoretical object, because sometimes some do not exist now, or I didn't have access to them, but most of them, 90% of them, I've been there. I inhabited for a period of from a few days to months in these places. So just to have the diversity, I've been in kindergarten and a lot in Paris, in Pompidou, to study how children would do activities in the context of contemporary art. Then in academic research ecosystem, so at MIT I did a 2-year study of lots of places, but also now I'm more involved in the Parisian one, and there are a lot of action, they are creating new universities and things, so it's very interesting to be there. In industrial innovation centers, one of my employers is Bell Labs, that is owned by Alcatel-Lucent, which is a big corporation like Airbus or CEA. I've been a lot in artistic residency place, like either places like Main-d'œuvre in Paris by Baitmas, or in places like in the US, around Boston, like in Providence. I've been to AS220, which is some kind of artistic place close to RISD, the School of Design in Providence. And also in a museum and places like this one, CAVS, which was a very interesting experimental art center at MIT that helped people in the 50s and the 60s to merge technology and art. I also go a lot in private places held by collectives, so this is where I put hackerspaces and Fab Labs. Because for me, again, there is no clear definition. Is a Fab Lab industrial? Maybe it can have links, but is it really, is it some kind of association? Maybe, maybe not, maybe it's a cooperative. So the categorization is difficult for a Fab Lab, and also for other places similar, Makerspace, Tech Shop, Hackerspaces. In Boston, you have a place called Sprouts. So Sprouts is a place, they refuse to have a name. So, so everybody gives them the name they want. So it's kind of a projective. It's a bit like the wheel that is still here. Difficult to move this wheel, it's still here. It's still a hole. So when you have a hole, you create a projective device like a Rorschach. You know this picture? So when when you create something that resists or that is a whole that is ambiguous, you help people to project who they are in the place. And sports is kind of place where it's a garage. This is where DIY Bio in Boston started, but they're also fixing bikes, they're doing poetry, cooking, molecular gastronomy, all in the same place. And this is where a lot of things are interwoven. It's kind of very interesting. And for me, in many ways, what I discovered by living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, is that there is a triangle where you have Somerville, Harvard, and MIT, and in between this golden triangle, they call it the People's Republic of Cambridge. And there are still some Marxist education center, which is very rare in the US, but it was a place where hippies moved because it was very cheap to live in the US. You still have, at the periphery, the border of pharmaceutical industry, big MIT labs and things. In between, you have little houses where things happen. And I think that there is something interesting that to see that there are this kind of byproduct of big corporation, big ecosystem, big university, although MIT is a corporation, so it's both, that happen. So again, maybe these are these kind of spandrels or open spaces where things happen. And maybe it's interesting to think of when we do a Fablab or here in Toulouse, what are these interstitial spaces that we might want to invade or occupy. And then the last one, I spend lots of my time with people that are not in a place. They just have projects, and they are doing them. This morning we saw a project of a greenhouse, and I spend a lot of time in greenhouses and other kind of weird projects of people that decide to do something. And I talk with them and try to document in my way what they do. So my approach is basically what I do, and maybe it could be an inspiration for people that would like to reflect on documentation in places like Fablabs, is that I document stories, narratives, because most of what we do usually is to communicate through little stories or narratives. We talk about what we saw. I've been to this conference about Fablab in Toulouse. It was great. I met Nicolas Lassalle, he's a great guy. Blah, blah, blah. So lots of things converge through narrative. There is this researcher called Richard Dawkins talking about cultural genes or memes, and I believe that the way we put them together is usually through stories. So I study these kind of stories. But for me, these stories are very, very good because they can live in what I say in my words that you can hear through this microphone. But sometimes they hide in physical object. So an object like this, for example, for me it's a good example of a story object. The meaning of this object is not to be a wheel that I push and to put a real baby on it, because look at the size, it's a very young baby, and I'm not sure you put your very 6 months baby in this thing. Maybe you're 2 years old, but maybe you need a bigger wheel. So one of the purposes of this object is to talk about itself. It's an autotelic object. It can allow also the person that brought it here, that maybe is here but maybe not, to talk about himself and talk about his life and his project. So it's an object that is highly indexical. It's un objet indiciel. C'est un indice, it's a cue that relates to a story. So the sole purpose of this object is to tell a story, and then the story can be a video, like a prosthetic leg could be also a story object that can then create a video that then can create a story that would be said and repeated with lots of people around the world. So I'm very interested in this physical story object. I'm also interested, and this is an example in the Media Lab. This is Hiroshi, this is my boss in the Media Lab, and he has a whole decorum, a lot of very interesting physical objects. And the one here is one of his favorites. There are bottles, and when you open one, it makes music. And all the way he presents this, it's called a demo. It's highly ritualized. You start by this bottle or this one. How do I know it? Because I've been trained by the practice, and I opened the wrong bottle. It was like, are you crazy? I was like, oh, I'm sorry, Hiroshi, I didn't know that you have to start with this, because this is a story, right? And you have a little part of, like in lots of, you know, some kind of show, you have an order, you have a ritualized way to do things. And I believe it's like in games or playful activities. But this is more like the rules of a game. And you see around other objects, there is one in wood. It's an object it's a telepresence object. When you roll one, it rolls the other one at a distance through the internet, and it's very nice because you can fight a little bit at a distance. Some people in Ivrea where I've been after took the same concept and put it back as a telephone where the cord, you could fight and you can hang the telephone and it goes like, okay. So it's like a physical connection at a distance. I study also, and this is a very interesting example, gestures and non-verbal cues, how you point, how you communicate with gesture, how these objects help you to do a shape or a specific communication with the body, and how basically it's different for me to move like an animal, okay, I don't know what kind of animal it is, or to move like a dervish dancer. It's not exactly like an animal, it's already a little bit abstraction of the animal. So what is interesting for me is how when we do gesture, we are high on the abstraction. At which level of communication are we in non-verbal or gestural communication? And in this example here, this is a beautiful, fully functional clock that is made with one of the top high-end object 3D printer. And the clock needs 16 hours to be printed, but when you put it, you take it out of the printer, you launch it and it starts, and it works. So you actually have to add two big metal thingy because the plastic is not heavy enough to launch it, but it's a functioning clock. And it's a beautiful device, and the guy here is Peter, is a sculptor from Germany that is explaining the clock, and he's telling his story, but he has a very nice artifact that is holding the story. It's the clock. So the story has a different impact, and here, I'm using a picture where you can see the object. I could just tell you the story, it will not have the same impact. So the object is important to maintain the state of illusion. So we can all enter into the space of the story because of the object. And I believe that a lot of things that we do in Fab Labs, they can act like this. And we shouldn't stop at this. We shouldn't stop at the illusion. We should go beyond in the game. And the guy here is John Fraser. Some people might know him, some architects or urbanists know John Fraser. He's a very pioneer architect, one of the first to have a computer in Cambridge when they had the computers, like Neil showed yesterday, the first computer connected to a CNC machine. So he was one of the first architects to do this in Cambridge, UK. Then he was the chief technologist for Frank Gehry. He invented a lot of things, and he was very interested in the collaboration between nature and artifacts and machines. And what is nice here is that Peter is able to tell him something very complex through the mediation of this object. And I'm very interested in how, when you hold an object in your hand, like this microphone, it constrains your gesture. So how, when you hold this, or when I saw you like this on the prosthetic limb, it's very interesting for me what is at stake, what is the real communication there. And I think it's interesting to document it. And these are other things I studied in Boston. So I studied a lot how intellectuals talk with their hands. So this is my boss in the top. This is a Microsoft guy. This guy is a lawyer from Harvard. This great guy. And she's a social network researcher from Microsoft and Harvard. And very often when they talk together, they would use very complex and nice English words that I don't understand, but most of them they would synchronize on gesture and then negotiate on gesture. They would almost dance together, and or almost fight together. You know, in some in Brasilia, in capoeira, you dance, but you fight, but you don't know. It's not really fight, not really dance. So here, are they really talking? I don't know. What is really happening? I'm very interested in that. What is really happening here? I don't know. And this is why I take pictures, so then I can ponder, think over it with other people. And during my PhD, and I will go fast on this because we won't have that much time, I think. But basically, I showed, I studied lots of terrains with children, so I showed you the one with the sensor edible, augmented reality in Pompidou. Paul Cox is the graphic designer that cut like 5 tons of wood, and he put it in Pompidou, and he said to the children, okay, do whatever you want with it. And I studied how when children, they would come with their father, they would do the biggest tower, and but then the problem is that in Pompidou the ceiling was not very high, so then the tower was the limit. But children, they would not do that. They would do lots of bridges, and they would play under, and they would break also. They would build and break, whereas adults, they would build and they say, no, don't touch it, I built it. Don't break my tower, please. And I studied a lot how when you're in this kind of environment, you can do lots of things with almost unlimited amount of materials. What happened? And what are the social norms that start to inhabit? What are the rules of the game that is played here? Also, who are creating the rules? I studied also wearable electronics, jewelry, and also this project. Maybe I have some picture after. Yeah, it's a model of a favela that is made by people from the favela that allowed them to travel all across the world to talk about their favela. And they made it with bricks. And I studied how in different places in Paris when it was exhibited, how children would play in it. And they were allowed to play in the sculpture, which was great. And how basically they were playing with everything but the sculpture. They didn't know it was a favela, they don't know what is a favela, but their parents were there. And it was interesting for me to see how, again, this story embodied in this sculpture would allow children to play in the interstitial spaces of them and how to document it and to recreate the origin of the story linked to that. So I pass rapidly. This one is nice, it's two Japanese. It was made after as a shadow monsters, but earlier project was to use some kind of basically object that children would create, and then they would register them because the shape of the primitive of the object is a pasta kind of spoon, and then the children would assemble their own puppet with them or a bottle opener, and then the system would recognize them and would create stories based on the shadow of the thing that they would be doing. And it was very nice because it was not just, oh, take this and look, it's augmented reality, you have moving flowers with my Kinect. First, it was before the Kinect, but whatever. It was more the idea that they would build physically something together, and they would play as much with just the shadow than the augmented reality system. And I think that was part of the fun, is to be there and to build with their parents and with other children. So, and also Lego everywhere. Lots of plastic. Actually, I have a slide, I didn't put it here, but there is a kit called Linka. You know Linka? It's a mold where you can do your own pieces for Lego. So instead of buying a injection molded Lego piece, snap fit, you can actually mold it. So maybe Neil would like it because he loves molding. But I think it's interesting to think of buying a toy or building the mold so you can give it to another child and you can mass produce things different. Then I will add in my presentation on my Flickr streams I have 20K pictures of Fablabs, Hackerspace, Makerspace I visited, so I will put it online if you're interested. You can go, there are Creative Commons, use them, abuse them, remix them, and don't quote me, but do something with them, okay? And I will just finish on that. I'm still trying to understand what I document, and I do believe more and more that what I think is not very important, is not more important than what everybody could reflect on what I documented. And this is maybe what I think now, that documentation is as important as interpretation. And as a person that likes to think, what I will say is already an abstraction of reality, and I believe we should share more what is reality, what is actually happening. So the three results is that basically these phenomena are not processes, like a Fablab as a phenomenon, or not even a culture, like I was trying to argue with Neil yesterday in the panel, but I believe they are ludic phenomena, where people are playing, okay? And you might argue that, oh yeah, sure, we are playing a little bit, but also sometimes in the process, I want to make a real company out of the prototype I do, and then I'm not playing, now it becomes serious. I am using the term playing as an anthropological term. The inverse of playing is not serious, it's reality. So Gregory Bateson said that. So I believe that playing could be very serious, and I believe even more that playing is a constitutive element of this phenomena. So it means, because it's constitutive, that if you remove it, you are not constituted of it, so it does not exist. So again, I believe that if you remove the playing element of these Fab Labs and all these places I showed you, they simply don't exist. They become something else. And I think this is a risk, and we might address it as a challenge. The second result is that their nature is paradoxical. I am not just one thing. I am not just a designer or entrepreneur or a person doing this or this. So you have to accept a certain amount of paradox. And paradox, again, is something that is a bit weird. We don't like paradox in modern society. We want certainty, deterministic processes, prediction, programmation. I want to be able to know that in 3 years I will be there and I will have enough money to do that and that and that. In the places I've been, it's not about that. It's like, no, I just want to do something. Maybe in 2 years it's not there, it's not here, and that's part of the thing. So how to accept paradox as a new cultural norm, I think it's very interesting. And the third result is that what is created in these places is not artificiality. It's not something artificial. It's more what is called by this woman called Robert Amaillon. She's an anthropologist from Paris. She calls it supernatural. And in terms of theory, it relates to this idea that modern anthropologists, like in France, like Bruno Latour or Philippe Descola, think that everything is political, and every agent, entities, objects, components that surrounds us in our context are political actors. And I believe that what is created in these places is not an augmentation or an extension of the nature, but it's a recreation, it's a recreative process of the natural by the humans, and we are not artificially. Take your wheel, please. I used it, thank you very much for it, thank you. And these are the three results, and I might explain more, but not in this context. So I will finish more by some challenges. So, the first challenge is centralized power systems, structure, usually either resist, they fight, they say, no, you cannot exist, or they recycle, no, come, yeah, come with me, I will do something with you, but differently than what you thought, we will work together differently. And I believe that either religions, and this is the thesis of Roberta Maillon, she said that basically religion, they took 12 centuries to devalorize the concept of playing. They first say that, oh, it's not for adults, it's for children, right? And no, it's not serious, it's playing, it's imagination, but then as an adult, you should do more serious things, you don't play. And in the same way, political system followed the religious organization, and maybe now social cultural norms are not celebrating playing. They are, or if they do, they celebrate playing according to the games, to the rules that are constituted by central authoritative systems like religion, political system, and social cultural norms. And I believe that what is at stake in these places that are still open is that the rules are not only defined by the spaces, but also redefined, criticized, challenged. They are open to discussion at a pace, at an efficiency level that is not present in this system. So, for me, one of the challenges is how to preserve the authenticity of this phenomena. And, for example, for a Fab Lab, how when you will be connected to this big cluster of funding and then they will ask you that in 6 months you do blah, 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 you will not lose your organization and you say, oh, you want a new machine. Yeah, you want a new machine, but maybe you want a new kitchen to present to our sponsors and partners what is important for, yeah, I want a kitchen, but I want a machine, because essentially I'm here to build something. So how not to dilute the authenticity, the originality of what we do when we are connected to powers related to us. The second is that, as I tried to express before, playing is essential, this is what constitutes me, and existential. So if we remove it, we disappear. It's as simple as that. I'm very threatening you, but I think it draws some questions. The first one is, who is the game master? If this is a game, now who is the game master? Is this Neil Gershenfeld? I don't think so. And I think that he's not taking this role, and he's part of the game, but he's not the game master. What we can say is it the people giving the money the game master? They might think so, but do we want this, or do we want one? Do we want one person, one central authority? I don't know. I'm asking questions. I don't have answers. The second thing is that if it's a game, can we imagine games that change rules dynamically? And here, I was going to a lecture in Harvard by a guy called Peter Stuber, and he has this theory of self-amendment. He says that basically in a game, only the person that is creating the rules can be outside of the game. So basically, if I play soccer with you, and then you're about to put a ball in the net, and there is a goal, I say, oh wait, just change the rule. Actually, if you mark now, I have the point. So if I'm the regulator, I can put myself outside of the regulation system. And he's a law professor, but in order to explain to his student how this theory is working, he created a game called Nomic. And the rule of the game in Nomic is that at every turn of the game, you have the right to change the rule of the game. And even this rule is changeable. So lots of people starting in the 80s started to play Nomic in lots of different places, mods, rules, BBS, forums, internet, physical spaces. And the idea is to criticize the fact that the rules of the games are made by one person, and it's like this. You could imagine a system where the rules can be not only changed, but that everybody could change them. And I believe this is what I saw a lot in this place, is that games exist, rules exist as initial things, but they can be discussed, they can be changed, and they can be addressed by everybody, not by just one person that say, oh, this rule is the one doing this. Not even she. Yeah. So the challenge would be, how do we challenge? So how do we fight